Jesus. What is that? What the fuck is that?
So The Little Mermaid is the latest live-action adaptation of a Disney classic alongside Peter Pan that came out recently as well. And this film tells the story of Ariel, a curious mermaid played by Halle Bailey, who is curious about humanity and wants to learn more about them, much to the dismay of her father, King Triton, played by Javier Bardem. And upon one evening when she ascends to the surface and falls in love with Prince Eric, played by Jonah Hauer-King, she strikes a deal with an evil sea witch, who gives her a pair of legs and 3 days to kiss Prince Eric or risk losing her freedom forever. I personally have not found much to be excited for when it comes to these live-action remakes Disney has been making. I did see The Jungle Book some time ago and I thought that movie was really well made. It had a lot of great CGI work and it did plenty of things differently with the script that I thought were really fresh compared to the original. But I think I would have preferred that film if I saw it much earlier on when I was a kid. And Cruella with Emma Stone I thought was pretty mediocre, even though it was an origin story and not just a remake of 101 Dalmatians. And much like Cruella, I didn't really have the highest expectations going into Little Mermaid, especially given the reception of the other live-action films like Lion King and Aladdin. I grew up watching the original and I loved that film when I was a kid. It has really catchy songs, really fun characters, and it's just beautifully animated. And coming out of the cinema, I will say, I don't hate this movie. I don't think it's a terrible film at all, and I think if you are of the younger generation, or by any chance you have not seen the original, I think you will enjoy this film a lot more than I did. Starting off with the positives, I think what this film does really well and where I think you'll find most enjoyment out of it is in its visuals and visual effects. It was really evident whilst watching the film that they did put a ton of hard work and passion into making this film look alive and gorgeous, especially under the sea, and for the most part I'd say they did that really well. The costume design, though, I felt was quite cheap looking. When Ariel goes up to the surface and she's walking amongst the humans, there's a lot of extras that are like banging on their instruments, and they have clothes on that look straight out of a fun fair. They have no grit or mud to them, and they just look incredibly cheap, and it was quite distracting at times. But for the most part, Little Mermaid is a cheerful, light-hearted, gorgeous film in its visuals, and I think that is definitely where most of your enjoyment will be. I also really liked a lot of the visual effects work and the transitions they added to this film. There's a scene in particular where Ariel is swimming around after singing a song, and then it cuts to this very small dark cave where the two minions of Ursula are hiding, and it shows their two yellow glowing eyes as they combine together, and then the camera pans out to reveal the magical ball that Ursula is using to spy on Ariel. I thought that was a really clever transition, and I really enjoyed what they did with those throughout this film. They also try to add more nuance to the main story, especially with Prince Eric and his adoptive mother, who is kind of like a parallel to King Triton and Ariel. She's really restrictive and she's far too protective of Eric, and she just doesn't want him going off to find trouble whenever he can. And they add a couple of new songs, one of which is well performed by Halle Bailey, which I'm going to get into in a moment. And it's those few additional moments that weren't in the first film that I felt added to it and improved it. However, despite all those positives, this film continues the tradition of completely rehashing the script and formula of the original. As someone who grew up watching the original, there was very little that felt new or fresh, and there was very little that was surprising about its story. It is best described as the first film, but in live action, which is, albeit, the point of the film. But again, as someone who just loved the original, I found very little to be surprised about, and it was just predictable in every way, and it just made the film drag for me. The classic songs that we remember are back, of course, and while I think they are fun, I can't really give praise to this film for most of its music, because it hasn't really invented most of this music. But at the same time, I can give praise to how they are performed. There are also just too few new ones, which was a bit disappointing. One of them is performed well, but the other I just did not like at all, mainly for the performance in that song, which I'm going to get into in a bit. But for me, the biggest letdown for this film was in its writing and its dialogue. There were so many one-liners and monologues that were completely from the first and made the experience just feel soulless and unambitious. There's even a scene where King Triton, whilst looking at Ariel towards the end of the film, says, "Well, I guess there's only one problem. How much I'm going to miss her." It's the exact same line from the original. And instead of reminiscing and allowing us to remember in a clever way of how great the original was, I was just left disappointed at how uninspired and unambitious this felt as a remake. I felt if it changed up a lot of its dialogue, added a lot more nuance to its crucial plot points, it would have been a lot better as a film, especially when you see what they did with The Jungle Book and how many changes they did to the story of that film. These are complaints that I do accept a lot of people to take issue with, as I know a lot of people will be of a much younger generation and they will go into this film not caring that much about the original and they'll have a great time with what it has. But for the most part, for someone who's seen the original, I found the storytelling and a lot of the dialogue to be a big letdown. As for pacing in the film, I felt the first act moved considerably well and I quite enjoyed that first act, but I felt it dragged considerably in the middle. And a lot of that is due to not just the dialogue and the script problems, but also a lot of the really awkward performances that I found throughout. I do have one exception to the acting though, and that is Halle Bailey as Ariel, and I thought she was a definite highlight in this film. And I think for the most part she does achieve a lot of the essential criteria that's needed for the character of Ariel. She's really likeable, she has a lovely singing voice, and for the most part I thought she was wonderful in the film. There were times, however, where I felt she had kind of an awkward blank face on during heightened emotional moments. It was as if she had forgotten to act, and it was quite awkward seeing that in those scenes. She didn't have much going on in her face, and she didn't seem to have much emotional connection to what was going on. But for the most part, I thought she was really good, and I really enjoyed her performance most of the time. But surrounding her, a lot of the performances I found really didn't work that well. There's a lot of really awkward and hammy acting surrounding her that just let the experience down. What was easily my least favourite performance in this entire film was Jonah Hauer-King as Prince Eric. I found his character so cringeworthy. He easily had the worst song in this entire film, and every scene he was in I just found boring, and a lot of the dialogue he had was really bad. Melissa McCarthy plays Ursula in this film, the Sea Witch, and she's a talented comedian. I don't really have anything against her at all as an actor, but in this film I just felt a lot of her line readings didn't catch up very well, and she just doesn't hold a candle to how Ursula was in the first film. In the first film, Ursula was like this great combination of humour, sassiness and sadism, especially towards the end, where she gets the crown and the trident. In this film, she comes off purely as comic relief, and I felt that just did a disservice to the character and made her way less menacing. Even Javier Bardem as King Triton, who I love as an actor by the way, he seems to play his character so straight without any real emotional weight to it. And for most scenes he was in, I just found him bland and uninspired. Now, none of this is really the fault of the acting. I find it really awkward to criticise actors personally. It's mainly the material they're handed, but for the most part I found a ton of the acting for this film to just be really weak and a big letdown, and it made the film drag considerably throughout. And lastly, while I think this is a pretty gorgeous film to look at, there are a lot of CGI choices that I found really questionable. The moment I saw the CGI Sebastian in the trailer for this film, I thought was a bad omen, and I thought he was just really bad in this film. I really didn't like his actor's voice work, and he was a real distraction for me. And as for Scuttle the Seagull, if you take the voice actor from Raya and the Last Dragon and make her perform as a character who is always blabbering, always talking at a high-speed voice, then You have a character who for me just comes straight from hell itself. I could not stand Scuttle in this movie. She was so annoying and I just wanted the film to end every time she came on screen. I hated it. Guys, in the end, The Little Mermaid both benefits and struggles from other issues that previous remakes have had. It's got the look, but not much of the heart and soul. But I do think some younger viewers who don't care about the original are going to have way more fun than I did. I'm going to give The Little Mermaid a 5 out of 10. Again, it's not a terrible film, I did not hate it. I think there's definitely some entertainment to be had, but at the same time it was just rather uninspiring and I just didn't really enjoy myself overall. Those are just my opinions about The Little Mermaid. I'd love to see some others in the comments below. Thank you so much as always for watching and I'll see you on the next video.